So we're here to mark sort of a mini celebration for me for a book that I'm very proud of. I usually, I mean, I work in a store, but my other job is I'm an illustrator, and I'm very honored to host Ilan, who is the publisher of the book, and it's going to be about Middlemarch by Geore Eliot, and the rest of the Restless Classics series, which I'll ask Ilan to talk about. And without further ado, I will go to the slideshow I have prepared. Just one second. Here we go. Okay. So I hope everyone can see my screen. So we're going to focus on Restless Classics. And I just want to mention to anyone here who would like to ask Ilan questions that Ilan will have to leave at about 10 to 10 p.m. So if anyone has any questions for him, just write in the chat, and then we'll do the Q&A. The first half, I'll have Ilan introduce himself and Restless Books, the classic series, and other emissions of Restless Books. And then in the second part, I'll dive into the specific illustrations for Middlemarch. And Nogo will put the link to see the book in our store and on our website. And I also promise to give away one copy of the book to anyone who sticks to the end. All right, so Ilan, do you prefer to have these or have your face?
No, I prefer this. It's much more pleasant to the eye.
All right, so would you introduce yourself and Restless Books, how it started, and specifically the classic series?
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be with you, Keren, and with everybody at Sipur Pashut. We have been fortunate in the past, Restless Books, to collaborate with this terrific bookstore in Tel Aviv with a children's book that we did not long ago that is trilingual, English, Hebrew, and Arabic. And it is an enormous pride to be able to return on this occasion with one of our classics. We are a small, maybe mid-size, independent nonprofit publisher based in Brooklyn, New York. Restless Books began in 2013 as a response to the very limited number of English translations of contemporary literary books from different parts of the world. As many of you might know, the United States, being the largest country in terms of economic and political power, is astonishingly poor when it comes to bringing works from other cultures into English, literary works, graphic novels, children's books, and so on. I am a Mexican Jew who was raised originally in Yiddish, then switched to Spanish, lived for a while in Israel, have lived in other parts of the world, and now I am a professor of literature and philosophy and the humanities in Massachusetts. And the creation of Restless was intended to respond to that diminishing presence of foreign books in the United States. We are going to be 10 years of age in 2023, and we're planning a big series of events and celebrations. The decade that we have been alive has been enormously productive. Our books, we're publishing between 15 and 20 books a year, have received enormous attention, many prizes. They are distributed worldwide in mainly the English-speaking world, Canada, India, New Zealand, England, all over the United States, but also in other parts of the world, in other linguistic territories where English language books are also available in the bookstores. We have different types of books that we publish. The bulk of our titles is, as I mentioned, translations of books that come from the Arabic, from the English, from the French, from the Portuguese, from the Spanish, from the Hebrew, and so on. But we also have children's books in a line that we called Yonder, that publishes picture books, chapter books, and children's and the young adult books. And we have an international prize for the best immigrant writing fiction one year, nonfiction the other year. And finally, we have a series called Restless Classics that brings us to today's discussion. We publish between 3 and 4 classics a year that are meant for disadvantaged or marginalized communities where the classics that are not often read or do not often reach. We have published a whole variety of classics, from Don Quixote to Frankenstein to Machiavelli to Robinson Crusoe to Virginia Woolf to Nella Larsen to Du Bois to Chekhov, etc. Our idea is that these books should reach communities of color, low-income communities. The prices are very available, very accessible to these communities. And they come with new illustrations, like the one that we are talking about today with Keren Katz, the Geore Eliot Middlemarch that she illustrated. We will talk about it momentarily. All our new books, all our new classics have illustrations. These are for Chekhov. These are by Machiavelli. And we match the classic with an illustrator from a different part of the world. They have been from Lebanon, from Morocco, from Argentina, from Mexico, etc. And we also bring in a new kind of unexpected introducer. I'll give you an example. When we published Robinson Crusoe, we asked Jamaica Kincaid, who comes from the Caribbean, from Antigua, to write a response to Columbus and to Robinson Crusoe being a product of the colonized Caribbean islands. So all of our books, the classics, are hoping to reintroduce this world literary artifact, mostly masterpieces, in a way that is unexpected for young and for people who haven't read them. We have a webpage that offers all sorts of complementary material. The books come with questions for new readers, for book clubs, etc. And we work directly with prisons all over New England, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, where the books are donated, and there are workshops with the incarcerated population that can read the classics for the very first time. There is a facilitator, and this workshops called Classics Behind Bars have 3-4 sessions where the deep thrown discussion on the classics takes place. We also work with the public libraries. You see over there some of the inmates that have read the books. We work with New York and LA public libraries, where the classics are brought in for immigrant communities to read them for the first time. Again, the classics are given for free to all the participants, and they engage with that population through a facilitator. We have a couple of foundations that give us money to this. That is mainly, Keren, the introduction to the classics and to Restless in general.
All right. I read an interview by you, a couple, and the interview is by, I'll name it. So you were interviewed by Jenna Tang. Mm-hmm. recently in May, and you brought up a few interesting subjects which concern our story as well. One is the idea that the 21st century is about the big theme of it, or the big thing that we should be addressing both as publishers, and I extend it towards the question of us as artists, and the big thing on our mind, and the thing that the culture should strive to highlight and celebrate and encourage, and is immigration. And this idea is also kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of in sync with translation.
Yeah.
And translation is as not just linguistic, but also you mentioned the phrase coming across.
Yeah.
The cultural conversation, and also translation. It has two faces, because it is bringing things from the past into a new context, and not necessarily I tend to differ, but it's not necessarily a creation of something new. It's introducing something, but Restless is also concerned and focused about creation. Yeah. And I wondered if you could just elaborate on this idea of immigration, and also how those two things, which seem to be kind of contradicting, focusing on our energy on two things, bringing things from the past, and also creating new, and creating space for voices. And
wonderful question. I am convinced that we are at a seismic kind of defining moment in the history of the world. Just as globalism is pushing us to be closer to one another, and the COVID-19 pandemic is a good example of how we are all monitoring where everybody else is, other nations are, in our own health, in our own connectivity. It is also a moment in which, because of climate change, because of the economic challenges, there are regions of the world that are becoming dire for survival, and people are forced to move, to be on the go. In this continent, I am in the United States, but come from Mexico. In this continent, the South is moving north. People from Central America, from Mexico, from South America, because of the political struggles, because of the economic inequality, and because of the climate change challenges that we face, are looking to relocate to the United States, to Canada. Borders are becoming very tense. In the Middle East, where you are, there are similar patterns from North Africa to Europe. Israel is becoming a very diverse society, but there's a lot of tension within Israel of who should be in, who should be left out. Germany has in itself one of the strongest economies, but Turks are moving in, people from the different sides of the Arab world, France, England, so on and so forth. I think that this is going to be already a theme that will define the 21st century. Who is in, who has resources, who belongs to the future, and who is left out, who is not named, who is looked down at, not fully human, not fully civilized. And to us who are in countries that struggle but are democracies, Israel, the United States, different parts of Europe and Asia, the question is one of representation. Who is going to be having a voice, and how do we allow different voices? Democracy is always a very loud and messy system, but it's important that as many voices are contemplated as possible. And I think that the role of publishers, the role of educators, the role of translators is to open up the discussion so that it is not only about politics, about representation, but about bringing in people into the banquet of culture, making us all feel that we have common elements that we can share, that we can engage with one another, so that whatever we consider valuable is not restricted to the same authors that have come always from Europe, but they can come from Africa, they can come from Latin America. So that many of the titles that we're publishing in the classics are titles that are either books that are suggesting different ways of looking at race or gender or representation in different parts, but also classics that come from other parts of the world that are expanding the canon, the bookshelf, that was traditionally not only seen exclusively as European and male and white. And for that reason, we are inviting, for instance, in books by women, to, like Frankenstein, to bring a woman from another part of the world that is not Europe or that is not England in particular, to represent images about Frankenstein, and the same thing with the introducers, to really be much more pluralistic. As an educator, I'm also a teacher and a professor. I think it's very important that we take the classics very seriously and that we look at them as not belonging to the same old group, but to a larger group. We expand that banquet. And in terms of translation, Keren, I think that I don't think the world can exist without translation. I think if we imagine such a world, it would be solipsistic and narcissistic and isolated. But translation is always a very difficult challenge. How do you bring a book from another part of the world that not only translated, but makes it accessible and available in a way that touches the sensibility of the people? Translations always have to be redone because they grow old very quickly, and new translations have to account for how the language changes over time. The way English was spoken in the time of Shakespeare is very different than today. We have many more words. We are always debating new words. In the word "they," for instance, means many different things today when compared to the time of Shakespeare. So I think that translation is the crucial key for the classics to be able to fit into the present and not simply to be relics, fossils of the past. And that goes also for the illustrations. If you look at illustrations, say, of Don Quixote of the 18th century, of 19th century, most of them are by men. Most of them are very macho and very kind of narrow. When you expand the illustrations to bring people of color, of different backgrounds, you get a much more nuanced way of how that book is being interpreted. I think illustrators are translators that represent the book through images, the way that the translator represents it through works. And I finally, in this question that you asked, this wonderful question, I can tell you that a small publisher, I think that a true democracy really depends on the role of small independent bookstores, small independent publishers who make an effort to bring voices that otherwise the corporate world doesn't include. And I think that you can measure the health of a democracy by seeing what is happening with the independent bookstores and the independent publishers. And many of us depend on donations. Many of us depend on the work of new people, young people, that are going to redefine the canon, re-illustrate the text. It's very exciting. Sometimes it's nerve-wracking because as an independent publisher, you might not have all the money to compete with the big publishers, but there's a lot of goodwill from people, from the readers. So yeah, I think translation and immigration go hand in hand. And I think those of us who have the privilege of deciding how a book and when a book is published, it is our responsibility to open the pool of perspectives so that our culture is healthier.
So many things that I mean, already out of time for all the things that in my head I want to ask. But I think you touched upon something that's very interesting to me, which is I want to immediately remark on it. I have three things. A translation is accountability. Something that we already accept by commissioning a translation or by reading, that this is an action that is not finite. This is something that we have to accept is as a framework which will is continuous. And treating a book, and I think this is something that kind of goes against the instinct of a book, because you hold something, and because of the commercial ties of a book to as a commercial product or commodity, you think of it, okay, this is the final product, but it's not a perfect being, and it's not a final product, and it's just a after all the publishing and the production and the work that went into the book, this is just a stepping stone. And there has to be an accountability on the part of the publisher and the reader. I also think of the translation as thinking of it as a creative process, which is just as much important as original work. And think of what it does to the language, also keeping the language accountable, like keeping us thinking that every single, it's more of marking the places in which language is shaky or should be shook. And then the last thing I want to remark as an illustrator, and it will tie me into kind of my part, and I'll bring up illustrations because I'm going to be talking about illustration.
People want to see your illustration.
I think of, at first I thought, as I read the interview with you, I thought, yes, illustration. Oh my gosh, yes, illustration is translation. It does the same thing. But then I thought that maybe no, because I think because I think I mean I could go on for this for hours, but just the first initial instinct is I said no, it's not a translation, it's an expansion. It's and it may be even the opposite of translation, because it instead of kind of translation and transgressing have the same prefix, and I think it's for a good reason. Instead of going into a new language, kind of like crossing a border, and then saying, I am responsible for all I have brought forth with me, and you have to trust me. It kind of does the opposite. It points and illuminates the original constantly, and it maybe opens up a space, and it says, I did one small, I'm just one single finger in a sea of billions of fingers pointing at this original. Please join me and point with me together. So by illustrating something, I'm doing the opposite of anchoring it to something. I'm actually opening up a space for saying, this is how I view the book. And then when you read the text and you think, oh, but I view the book differently. It kind of, it's making it extremely subjective to the person doing it, rather than looking at the big context of the text, which a translator has to be true to the text, the historical context, the social context, and the illustrator does so, but also by doing it says, this is just one of many, and inviting a place of conversation. And then I thought, because this is a question we think about all the time, is why print books? And when you mentioned the intro to by Jamaica Kincaid, I thought that printing books is it's an important act of anchoring a layer of complexity in space, saying this particular conversation deserves a physical space on our shelf, and this conversation is made up of the original text the commentator, the illustrator, and this is just one example, kind of like setting off and marking the difference between this and the other versions of it. So it's not, and then I thought, okay, and then I arrived at the thought that illustration is illustrating the difference or the distances between things. Mm-hmm. And the distances between things are just as important to note as the thing itself, the distance of meaning. So that's my weird kind of brain warp that you've encouraged.
Beautiful, beautiful. Why don't you put some of the illustrations that you did yourself for Middlemarch, which is our latest classic. And I can just say a couple of things based on what you said, and then I'd let you take over from there, Keren. I believe that the classics are books that are that exist by being reread, whereas a new book is read and has a certain limited patience. A new book comes out, there are 3-6 months in which people either find it or don't find it, and then for the most part those books disappear. They are not, there's no more space for them. The classics are books that people keep on going back for whatever reason, and they become part of the larger legacy of humankind. They are books that are patient because they wait for the readers to come, whereas the new books don't have that luxury of waiting. But because of that, the classics, I don't think really exist. This goes in the direction of what you were saying. I don't think Don Quixote exists per se. I think Don Quixote exists in the people that reread it all the time, in that subjective nature that you were describing. And I think that Don Quixote is the sum of all the readers that have read it, of all those subjective, partial views. And there's a contract between the classic and the next generation that will take into account. Many of us say, why should I read Don Quixote? It's a big book, it's an old book, I'm not interested in it. But somehow the classics managed to be recaptured, reintroduced, reimagined, and the new generations read against the previous generations and invent their own interpretation of the classic. They are not only in dialogue with the book, they are in dialogue with all the people that have read the book before, and with all the people that are going to come after them too. And I think that in many ways, what you're saying about the illustrator is even more of that. I think you're right. It expands the space. It's one reading of the classic. Look, the beautiful images that you have done of Middlemarch. And your images, either you want it or not, either you were conscious or not, are in dialogue with the illustrators of Middlemarch that have come before. And people are also, who have not yet been born, are going to look at your illustrations in the future and do new illustrations, because you are in a ahistorical or transhistorical dialogue with others who are imagining the main characters of the novel. Like a movie also reimagines Jane Austen's Emma or whatever other text. So I think and we are moving, maybe I'll finish here and you take over, Keren. We are moving, fortunately and unfortunately, from the printed word culture to the graphic culture, much more than ever before, to the point that maybe the book as a unit might not exist in the future. I'm confident that it will continue to exist, but it's becoming really the property of a smaller and smaller group. It's people who buy books. It's a smaller percentage than in the past comparatively, but I think that people appreciate the fact that they have a real physical book in front of them. And I think that makes us publishers responsible of how we're going to publish that book. But why don't you talk about your illustrations?
Yeah, okay. So speaking of that, I forgot to mention just we are a bookstore after all, and we are surviving. We're in the middle of crowdsourcing a Head Start campaign for, we're also the publishers of Granta. I'm sure you know it, in Hebrew. And it's all about translating contemporary writing and introducing voices and opening up these borders, and constantly seeing how much people were privy to, we see more people not buying books than people buying books, but it's part of it. I mean, I think if it wasn't this, the fact that it's a struggle as a bookstore, and we're in a constant mood of survival, and Granta as well as a kind of publishing thing we have taken on, because I think, like you introduced in Restless, we don't see the book as the final commodity. We see the store as the final place. We see the meeting of people. We see the non-commercial aspects of it. And if it wasn't a struggle, we also wouldn't have the motive to change things. I mean, this is how we constantly think. We have to answer the question, why a printed format? Why? And we also pride ourselves in having a large ecological section and books about ecology, and it's kind of like a paradox of the printing things and not using digital, and what the meaning is. So these are questions that we're constantly asking, but because of the lack of time, this will be a different conversation. And I'll just, as promised, we'll show a few. I'll just mention that I'll talk for 10 minutes, and then if someone has, I'll talk for 5 minutes. Then if someone has a question for Ilan, Ilan has to go to another lecture. And also, but if you want, you can also write to us later. So I'll just quickly show some things. If you have a question, tell us now in the chat, because so we just know how to manage the time. So when Alison Gore, who is the editor that worked with me on this book, emailed me to illustrate Middlemarch, I was super excited, because it's a book which I have downloaded as an audiobook about, I don't know, I think 5 years ago, when I came across Rebecca Mead, who wrote the introduction to the book. I came across her lecture on YouTube, and I found it so fascinating, especially the story of her reading Middlemarch before her interview to Fancy English College, which is my alter ego's dream, and then getting accepted after talking about it. And I thought, wow, reading books is the key to every single dream I have, and I really wanted to read it. And she is also the author of a book which I read called My Life in Middlemarch, and about rereading Middlemarch throughout her life. And so but I actually never gotten around to reading it, and I'm sure you can see why. I mean, this tells it all. This is like a 900 page. This is the Hebrew version, the English version. It's just not suited for modern life, for people who have to work. So getting the opportunity to illustrate it, I was really excited, and so began my life in Middlemarch, or my year. And my coworkers can attest that I couldn't read any new books for like half a year or 6 months. It was just, I couldn't read anything. Boxes come into the store with new books, and I couldn't read any of them, right? Because I had to read Middlemarch. And I also wanted to, I was really excited, and I thought I would get to see the series Middlemarch from the 90s, but they couldn't access it in Israel because of, it's funny that Middlemarch is called a study of provincial life, because in Israel is, despite the fact that we're in the midst of a major world conflict, we're also very provincial, and nothing is that easily accessible here for various political and just geographical reasons. And neither was this, and I couldn't find it, and I couldn't see it. So this is just a dream. But what I did see is, throughout this year, is various extremely popular Netflix shows, horror shows, dramatic shows. This one is from a show called You on Netflix. I was stunned to see that there are Middlemarch references everywhere, like this small sequence. It's a party in a bookstore, and they all dress up as literary characters, and she approaches someone and says, "Mr. Darcy, I take it." And then he says, but he says it in an American accent. And then he says, kind of shamefully, "Indeed." And she says, "Predictable." Says Elizabeth Bennet, he says. And she scoffs and says, "God, no, Dorothea Brooke." And then he says, "Middlemarch, name my shelter cat after George Eliot." And then she says, he says, "I love her." And then she says, "The cat or the author?" And then he says, "Both." And then Middlemarch is also in the series Sex Education. Here, Maeve, the character Maeve, reads Middlemarch. She reads a lot throughout the series, but kind of this reminds me of what Dorothea Brooke kind of sensibility, which is the main character in Middlemarch, where she is constantly striving for knowledge and to hold it and to have the key to all knowledge, which is how she ends up in this loveless marriage. But then she has everything at the tip of her fingers, and yet she looks constantly to things, or something is displaced, even when you actually hold the thing, you are displaced from it. And she looks out, and yeah. So these are sorry, I'll start. For those of you who don't know, Middlemarch is 8 volumes, and so it's like 8 books, which were published consecutively. And I illustrated the chapter heads for each book. I'll move the thing. Oh, yeah, you can see. So this is the first one, Miss Brooke. It's Dorothea. The second one, volume 2, Alden Young. This is, I don't know if you can recognize this sculpture. Waiting for Death. 3 Love Problems. The Dead Hand, The Widow and the Wife, 2 Temptations, Sunset and Sunrise. Those are the 8. So my initial sketches are in a technique which I usually use. It's a colored pencil, and I sent them to Alison. When I sent them, I was already kind of skeptical because they didn't for me, they had movement, but they didn't have, they were kind of an illustration of the actual text, maybe, because in this technique, I need to research the thing I'm going to draw, and then I draw it. I have a white blank paper, so I need to find things in which to inhabit the paper with. So whether it's the dress, looking at reference photos for horses, collecting reference photos, but the process kind of felt intimidating because Middlemarch is a huge classic, and I have it's a lot for me to invent. To kind of curate things into it. I felt like I didn't have enough knowledge or breadth of context for it, aside from reading the book. And then I went to another technique, which is kind of the opposite process. I start with black sticky paper, which I stick on plastic sheets, mylar sheets. And I start with black, and then I cut, as the joke says, I cut everything that's not Middlemarch away from it. But this kind of allowed me to work without reference photos at all. And if you read even just the first line of Middlemarch, you'll know this on the left is Dorothea Brooke. It might kind of clash with the idea that is expressed about Dorothea, that she is this incredible beauty who is thrown into relief by modest clothing or poor clothing. And so, but this is not quite it's full of detail and kind of, I mean, if you look at it at face value, the garment she is wearing is full of detail here on the left, but the idea in this technique here as well as Dorothea, the idea of this technique is that the image is more about the actual technique of it, or to me rather, or I hope people see it that way. The center, because I wasn't using reference or historical reference, I was just thinking about the emotion of the scene, and also the fact that the entire image or composition is created by the relationship between characters, and that relationship is needed to be because this is black and white, and I'm cutting away, and I can't really kind of design it. Here you can see just the beginnings. In the simple sense, each character is where the other character isn't. That's how I create the compositions, and the emotion is present where the black isn't present, or the black paper. So cutting away these small shapes is more to represent a kind of rhythm or tension, and it's more thinking about abstract shapes, round or circular, or the negative shapes to frame the characters, and not necessarily details which depict a reality. But it's more how one is framed by one's spot, or how one is framed by the other person present in the room, or in the case of Middlemarch and the meaning of Middlemarch, how the people in the room are actually quite displaced from one another. This is kind of echoing the theme of the book to me, is the fact that it's all at the same time. Everyone in Middlemarch is in a small town, and they all know each other, and they're all kind of in close quarters, and it's also, and everybody has grand inspirations that radiate from here to everywhere, but at the same time, everything is missed. And so I have these kind of themes of, or shapes and themes, which I use kind of a realistic thing like a curtain to show the barrier between characters, but the curtain is, it can also be echoed with this dragon. So it's realistic things and imaginary things, and death lurking all the time. And I like that in the novel, there are dramatic deaths, like the one in the opera scene. But that's not the most dramatic death in the book is not actually the important death, or the most dramatic moments are not actually the important moments, or the moments that will count. And so I use it, if you, so sometimes the shape in the illustration showing the relationship is the actual arms of the characters, but in other times the shape is echoed by objects. So they're based on they're not, this is more of me as a sequential artist or a comics artist at heart. The single illustration is less than the sum of its parts, and when read all together, they kind of form, they kind of achieve more meaning or context. So wait. What time is it? Oh, so this is what it looks like when I peel it off. Here, I don't know if you can see my arrow moving around, but these are kind of the sizes of them. And just to finish off and to show you kind of virtual exhibition, I have can you still see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Just to remove a set of pieces before
this happened during a lot of chess tournaments, which is the audio. So this is just me cutting away, just so you can see the scale of it. And the process is. Oh, you can't see my screen?
You cannot see your screen.
Oh.
Try to reshare something. And it's
you should stop the share and start a new share.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Okay, can you see now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay, so this is just the size and using my knife to just cut away small pieces. So just to show how the illustration was formed, the characters or how they're placed on the page really have to depend on the presence of the other. And then these are the final illustrations before they got scanned. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, I think we can see the video that you had.
This one, the one
Yeah.
where I'm showing the video. Okay.
Yeah.
So just the scale to show the scale of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Ilan, you have to go soon, right?
Yeah, I do. But if you allow me to say one or two things before I go.
Yes.
Your illustrations, Keren, are just gorgeous, stunning. I'm glad that you went through that journey of trying to figure out how best to express not the action but the emotions, and to create a point counterpoint in black and white of the various characters and the emotions that they are experiencing. I remember seeing for the first time when Alison Gore forwarded the images to me, your illustrations, and feeling very excited by the result. I have to say also two more things. As a Mexican who grew up with images of skeletons, of the Day of the Dead, in this type of contrast, I immediately identified with the universe, the galaxy of the constellations that you had created. And we have imagined for Restless, I don't know how far or fast, Keren, a Shakespeare, a Restless Shakespeare. And I can see some of that style in Hamlet and or in maybe in The Merchant of Venice. That could work beautifully. I just think that you, as you were saying before, you interpret and you open the space to that subjectivity. It's a beautiful approach that you have taken, in the Mazel Tov.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, so we'll be in touch, hopefully.
I'm going to excuse myself, hopefully not impolitely. I want to thank Sipur, you guys, for doing the beautiful work that you do, in spite of the fact that you are named after an Agnon story is all the more classic and connected. And Keren, thank you for organizing this. We'll be in touch, and we'll see you soon. Hasta la vista. Bye-bye.
Hasta la vista. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, but if not, I'm going to do the raffle. And also, I had one thing which I was going to say about the illustrations and I forgot. Oh, no, never mind. I'll remember later. Okay, so כן. Yes.
קודם כל זה היה מרתק ותודה רבה. ואני אשמח לשאול.
Would you mind just in English, just because
yes, of course, sorry.
It'll be broadcasted later on YouTube.
I want to ask how did you do the connection with the publish? How it happened? It looks very special, this
oh, I mean how they approached me, or
yeah, I would say
I have no idea.
Very, very nice.
It's Keren fucking Katz.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I really
nice.
I didn't ask how. I mean, I try to be visible in the illustration world, but I neglected it during these last few years. I used to be a lot more active in sending off my portfolio to publishers, but I neglected it, so I was very surprised. But it's always and especially during COVID, because the loneliness, I did this during the most closed time, and just the thought of it, of art having life beyond the house was very moving. And I was listening to Middlemarch while I was walking home from work, and no one was on the street, so Tel Aviv became Middlemarch very easily because there was absolutely no one around. So it was, I think any kind of artistic project makes me hopeful. But at the same time, I'm becoming more more anxious about the fact that what Ilan is talking is great as an aspiration of opening borders, but I feel that the world is, but the bigger world that is closing its borders culturally. There's a lot of censorship, there's a lot of politics, and I'm afraid, because this is what saves us, and it's also what's at the most risk. But I don't know. Hi, Shiraz.
Thank you.
Yeah, but if anyone is an illustrator and has more technical questions about how to promote illustration, I'd be happy to answer privately. Okay, so the raffle. I have one book to bribe you with, and then the rest of the audience present can buy the book at Sipur Pashut with the link that Noga sent. And also, I'll just remind you that we're in the last days. Noga, can you put the Head Start link as well? We're in the last days of Granta, which is exactly the topic of this conversation. It's translating contemporary literature and voices, local voices, and also voices from around the world, and doing everything we can to keep going. We have only 3 days more to get the 100% support, but we also have someone who is willing to double any donation. So even the smallest donation will be triple fold. So please consider. And it's actually not a donation. It's just buying an issue of the new Granta in advance. And then, okay, so if anyone wants this copy, could you please write your name in the chat, and then sorry, write, I'm not looking at the chat, forget the names, just write a random number, and then I'll pick a number before I look at it, and that will be, and the closest number to the one I pick will get the book. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna look. Did you write the number? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna pick a number. The number is 27. Who wrote? Oh my God.
The 12, Neta.
Okay, Neta. You won the book. Cool. So send me your address, or no. Actually, the easiest thing is, do you live in Tel Aviv?
No.
Okay, so send me your address.
Thank you.
You can send it privately on Facebook if you don't want everyone to see it. And okay, and so thank you very much. And Ilan!